Welcome to Empower You, everyone. I'm Dan Reganold. Empower You is a series of free seminars to help you become more empowered in your lives by helping you to get educated, learn about things, have fun, get engaged, and learn about important topics like what we're going to talk about tonight, like about issue 7. And we're going to talk about the important issue of China and how that's even gotten more important in the last couple days. We're going to have a great couple speakers here with us tonight. So I wanted to share with you just the fact that our studio, where we have most of our meetings, Empower You Studio, is closed due to coronavirus. I wanted to say hello to the great people that make Empower You happen. We've got Betty Overstreet, our great executive director. We've got Jill Google, our operations manager. We've got Bill Roll, who is our treasurer and chief popcorn maker, and Jay Grunke, our producer. And also Joe Platt, whose picture isn't up there, who's kind of our political guru. And I don't know if you can see this on the screen or not, but we've been gone from Empower You Studio so long that I've kind of been having a popcorn anxiety fix. And I've had to bring in some Cousin Willie's popcorn tonight just to chew on, because I'm so used to having it in the studio. And it's to be honest with you, it's not really up to Bill Roll grade popcorn. So Bill, if you're out in the studio tonight, I just want to tell you, I'm so sorry that I had to bring Cousin Willie in, and forgive me, but it could only be in a dire situation like this that we would have to bring Cousin Willie in. We had a giveaway the other night when we had a great class on healthcare, and Mike Wilson talked about Restart Ohio. If you haven't signed the petition yet to Restart Ohio, it's so important. We had 2 winners the other night. We had Tom S. won, and we had Carolyn A. who won. And what they won was designer face masks. That's me, that's yours truly. And that's a face mask that our company is going to start manufacturing in about 2 weeks. So Carolyn A., Tom S., you're the big winners. Wear them safely. Tonight's giveaway, we're talking so much about leadership every day when you see Governor DeWine on the screen, when you see Donald Trump on the screen. I thought it'd be great to have a look at another very important leader, Abraham Lincoln. We're going to give this book away to somebody who's in the big listening audience tonight. Thank you all so much for signing up. If you'd like a chance to win this book, Team of Rivals by Doris Kearns Goodwin, I'll tell you what it's about. It's about Lincoln and how the single most important thing in his presidency was ability to bring his disgruntled opponents together. Does that sound like something we need? And that's what this book talks about. If you want a chance to win, just take your cursor down to the bottom of the screen. You'll see a little icon that says Q&A, and then just click that on and give me your email address, and you'll be randomly, you might get randomly chosen to win the book, and we'll send it to you. So please do that if you're interested in the book. It looks like it's a great read. So I've got to give you a quick editorial real quick before we get started, because there's something that's concerning me a lot, and that involves all the law enforcement officials coming out and just talking about letting all the criminals out of our jails. We had an incredible class last semester. It was such a scary class. People actually were kind of scared to come to it, but it involved the tragic murder case of Ohio State student Reagan Tokes. And what all the law enforcement people are telling you when they're letting all the criminals out is that don't worry, they're ankle monitored. But what we found out about Reagan Tokes was that in many cases, ankle monitoring is not done real time. In a lot of cases, people don't even know that the criminals have broached their ankle monitoring area until the next day or several days later after the fact. So we're all thinking that these criminals are being monitored, and in fact, many of them are just roaming around doing whatever they want to do. So if you hear your area talk about letting criminals go, perk your ears up. It's important. I want to tell you about a couple of our great classes we've got coming up. Tuesday night of next week, we've got Matt Miller Novak, who will come in and talk to us about the First Amendment. What it's going to specifically talk about is if you want to address your city council, your county commission, your board of government, what are your rights, what you can do, and if you're not allowed to speak or get your opinion across, what you should do next. And I'm sure this applies so much to COVID-19. And we've just added one more speaker that I'm so excited about having Tuesday night, and that is Tom Zawakowski has been added to the program. You know, I told you the other night I'd been thinking an awful lot about liberty in Ohio, and I have been, and it hasn't stopped. And when I think of liberty in Ohio, there's one guy that I think of, and that's Tom Z. Um, I wanted to have him in to talk to you at the beginning part of Tuesday night's program to kind of let you reset your feelings on liberty in Ohio and just some of the things that may or may not be going on. So we look forward to having Tom. Next Thursday night, we've got Greg Lawson from the Buckeye Institute, one of Empower U's frequent speakers. He's great. He's going to talk about an article he wrote. With so much tax revenue being lost from Ohio, what do they do? Where do they cut? How do they make it up? Greg is the master of finance in the state of Ohio. If you've never heard him speak, make sure you join us next Thursday night. And he'll be joined by John Deaver, who was the former House representative from District 28, which is around Sharonville. And John's going to join us and talk about a difficult subject, and that will be the difficult subject of dealing with creditors, losing a home, fighting foreclosure, maintaining your livelihood without filing for bankruptcy. And it will be an interesting talk next Thursday night. And I hope you all can join us. I've talked to you a couple times about our initiative to help the seniors fill the truck.org. We've got about 1 week to go on that. So I want to get into our topic, our first topic tonight, and that's the topic of issue 7. Issue 7 is the largest levy in the history of Hamilton County. Now, different people have kind of criticized me for how I characterize it, but it's somewhere in the 3.5, 4, 5 times the cost of Paul Brown Stadium and the Great American Ballpark combined. So it's a bunch of money. SORTA is asking us to give them 238% more than they are currently earning, and the levy will amount to $3.2 billion over the next 25 years. So I think the question I want to ask you first is really, should we, the citizens, this applies to you if you're not in Hamilton County or if you are, should we be allowing a group of people to put a levy on a ballot in the month of March when really the election only applies to really, in this case, Democrats that are voting for the primary? Is that reasonable? So as you know, every Empower You class, I give you suggested reading. And what I'm going to ask you to do a little later on is go to empoweruohio.org and bring up tonight's suggested reading. And what it is, it's an opinion piece that was written by Dusty Rhodes on October 20th, 2003. And he addresses this issue of people throwing levies on the ballot to try to kind of get them to approve it during off times of the year that people normally don't expect to vote. And what Dusty says is, it's cynical to time levies so as to deliberately depress turnout and gain passage by organizing a narrow constituency. The truth is, the present system, it's a stacked deck against the taxpayer. And I agree fully. These May levies, these August, I know we had a school district that was going to do an August levy. It's all gained just to try to game the voter. And this levy with issue 7, it's just complicated because we're not going to have hardly anybody vote for the largest tax increase in the history of Hamilton County. So I asked a person to come and join us tonight who's taught me so much about mass transit that I didn't know, and that's Barbara Holwadel. Barbara was born and raised in Anderson Township, and she's a graduate of Anderson High School, then Wilmington College, and she's got a BS in business. Barbara was elected precinct executive and subsequently ward chair of the party in 2010 to 2018 in Madeira, and has always made sure that she worked the polls on election day. She's been active in local groups such as the Ohio Battleground Alliance, the Hamilton County Victory Centers, and general candidate support, especially for President Trump. She's a big believer. She has run for State Central Committee and Madeira Council. She believes in the American dream, and she believes that the American dream is under siege, like so many of us do now. She's researched issue 7 and the economic drain of mass transit and what she believes is the deceptive nature, which she'll tell us about. And she's grateful to the hardworking team of volunteers that have stood outside to help her at the Board of Elections, which has been hard. She's really been a mentor to me as I've kind of learned about mass transit in the area. So with that said, I would like to introduce you all to Barbara Holwadel. Come on in, Barbara.
Hi, Dan. Thank you for having me tonight, and thank you for all you do for the community. It's great. You know, you watch out for the poor, and the Bible says that there is a special blessing for people that watch out for the poor. And at the end of the day, I think that this issue really is about the poor, because the other side will say that the poor need buses. This is the most egregious money grab in the history of our county. And to put this on the ballot in the primary, in the words of Dusty Rhodes, it's a very dishonest way to approach a tax increase, to put it on the ballot in a primary. It should be on the presidential general election in the fall. That's the first way that the deck is stacked against us. And it just rolls, if this passes, it just rolls us further down the road to socialism. And that ties in really with my discussion about the poor. You know, all you have to do is ask the people of Venezuela, is socialism good for the poor, the low income, and really, is it good for anybody in society? And I would say to that, you know, obviously you can look at what's going on in Venezuela just to see what's coming if we allow this to happen.
And this really, this is a super regressive tax, meaning it hurts the lower income earning people more than it hurts anybody else, right?
Well, it takes a larger percentage of their income. I mean, and once again, referring back to Dusty Rhodes, he called this being nibbled to death by 1,000 ducks. Back in 2008, he wrote an article about passing what seemed at the time to be insignificant tax increases, a little bit here and a little bit there, but the cumulative total adds up to the point where eventually it becomes too expensive for people to live in the county. And if you don't believe me, all you have to do is look at LA, San Francisco, and Seattle. They're running a little bit ahead of us here on this curve. And they have a problem with the homeless.
I guess I could also just look at my property tax bill, right?
Correct. So, you know, Seattle right now is being overrun by the homeless. I think we got a little taste of that a few summers back, where we had the tent cities being erected downtown, and we didn't really quite know what to do with that. But at the end of the day, it's about affordable living in the city of Cincinnati, and in this case, because they're combining us together with the city, also the county. I don't know if you saw the article that I wrote in opposition to issue 7, called 7 Reasons to Vote No on issue 7. But in that article, I discussed the fact that that it's time for us to wake up and stop passing all these voluntary levies. I mean, we had the library levy, and thanks to you, we were able to get the icon tax reduced at the time, but now that's a fixture on our taxes, and on it goes from there, with just making it ever more expensive to live in the city and in the county. And once again, that's what I wanted to say about my article, is how this blurs the lines between the county and the city. I mean, SORTA was instrumental in getting the streetcar passed. And they want to say that this is not about the streetcar, but how do we really know that? How do we rest assured that they won't somewhere down the line, you know, take this money and tie it back into the shell game of paying for the streetcar with this massive tax increase? So if you want to go, let's just talk a little bit about mass transit. And if you want to go to the first slide, I would just like to talk about the fact that mass transit is ever increasingly unpopular It's going down, and it's been going down since 1964, when the federal government first started subsidizing. Mass transit has been in a steady decline. Those riders are gone, and for all intents and purposes, those riders are not coming back. So yes, while you may see a bus go down the road that's got, you know, a fairly good crowd on it, those are becoming less and less popular. You know, people really don't like getting on big city buses and sitting there for 60 minutes riding a bus for something that, you know, would be maybe a 10-minute drive in an individual car. So, you know, that we really do need to discuss the issue of winding down the big gas guzzling empty buses in our county. I know this isn't a popular subject to bring up, especially with, you know, just the situation with people needing a way to get around. But let's talk about modern technologies. Let's talk about the apps that you can get on your phone, where you can call, you know, you can hail a ride on Uber or Lyft, or, you know, I hear that out in Phoenix, they even have driverless cars now. And honestly, those are probably more efficient, and they provide more to the people that need a ride, because it picks them up at the door where they live. They don't have to walk for a mile to get to the bus stop, and it drops them off where they're trying to get to. So it's called door-to-door service, and people prefer door-to-door service. So if we could talk about the second slide, I'd like to talk about the fact that, you know, the fares in no way begin to cover operating expenses. So this slide shows you, you know, that the fares for the most part stay even, or they, you know, they go up a little bit, but they in no way keep up with inflation or the cost of living. So that as we get farther and farther down the road, SORTA and Metro are going to need ever more increasing amounts of money, because the federal dollars are kind of drying up. So, you know, the federal government subsidizes mass transit nationwide to the tune of $50 billion a year. But, you know, there's a reason why we're needing to now subsidize it at the local level. And, you know, for me, I'd like to get on to the next topic of what's important to me about this, and that's deception. You know, the annual, let's see. Let's talk about the fact that the deception of issue 7 being on the ballot in the primary to begin with, and the deception of passing a tax that is for buses, all the while marketing that tax as being for road infrastructure. So, you know, I guess in a way, I just think it's very disingenuous for this group called Move Forward to be, you know, saying that this is for the poor people who need a ride to work, when really what this is about is a massive, you know, money grab for the rest of for the county, and it builds a big bureaucracy now. It makes the bureaucracy larger, and the money will be going into an account called the Integrative Committee. Will have control over this money. So the issue with that is that they're not elected and they're not accountable. However, they'll be getting anywhere from $10 million a month on up to, you know, maybe even as much as $15 million a month. Unfortunately, another deception that's out there is that they have not accounted for the for inflation in their money. When they say that it's $3.2 billion that this is going to raise, That's $3.2 billion in today's terms. However, they have not accounted for inflation. So if you do account for inflation, that number can go anywhere up from 3.2 to as much as 4.8 and even on up to $6 billion, just depending. I mean, you know, the money isn't really there yet, and we don't really know what the economy is going to be doing. So, you know, it's anybody's guess as to how much money this actually is going to raise. So
Now,
if you,
Barbara, one of the things that I wanted you to discuss was the fact that with so few people voting in this election, um, that it's very hard because the sort of folks, with the help of different people like the United Way, who donated $100,000 of donations to this campaign, they've gone out and spent a lot of money kind of chasing these few voters that are voting. And it's made it very, very complicated for the citizens because there aren't a lot of people going out. How many people are actually, do people in Hamilton County understand this election is coming and almost upon us?
well, I think that potentially the delay of the election may have ended up waking more people up. It's just given people time to um, honestly to pay attention to what's going on in our county and in our state. I like to think that we're getting the message out in the different ways that we're trying with different people talking on the radio, uh, uh, the yard signs, and then we are doing mailers and vote chasing. I am concerned though, Dan, that it's pretty much washing out to be exactly what they wanted, and that is that the Democrats are pulling ballots. You know, you can track that at the Board of Elections. They're pulling ballots to the tune of about 2-1, Democrats to Republicans right now.
Now, do you sense that that's because the Republicans don't, a lot of them probably aren't even really worried about going and voting in the Republican primary for president?
Well, definitely that. I mean, Donald Trump is running unopposed, and up until a week ago, they had a contested primary between Bernie Sanders and Joe Biden. Um, I don't really understand how they drive their voters to the polls in such massive numbers that they do. I can say they must have a well-oiled machine from what I see. Because, you know, as we know in 2018, unfortunately, they did a very good job of driving their voters to the polls, and they're pretty much eating our lunch if we call us Republicans. Uh,
So one of the things you mentioned Republicans that I just can't quite understand. I'm always used to kind of these Democrats, kind of Keynesian spending, kind of helping people giving programs, social programs to help them take care of themselves. Republicans are kind of supposed to be fiscal conservatives, worried about taxes. And one of the most curious things to me is this issue with the Hamilton County Republican Party. Um, they're saying that what's their wording? They're saying that they're not taking a position on issue 7. What does that mean?
okay, so the way that the party is run is that chairman has the ability to call an executive committee meeting, and at the executive committee meeting, they will present different candidates and issues for endorsement. And historically, our chairman stays out of primaries, um, supposedly, ideally, I guess you could say, and especially in the case of candidates. I think that's probably a good thing, that it levels the playing field. It makes it so that the party is not necessarily helping one candidate or another in the primary. However, in the case of an issue like this, especially when the Democrats have come out soundly endorsing a vote yes on issue 7, when you combine that with the $2 million that they've spent in radio, TV, and mailers, it's really a shame that people who stand up for fiscal responsibility and live in a limited government haven't had really any voice out there as a result of the failure of the committee to vote for an endorsement of this issue.
Well, it's
I
funny.
just wanted to go ahead.
It's funny. Your position on issue 7 is a little different than mine. You're flatly opposed. I am in favor. I've got employees that ride the buses. I'm in favor of doing better than we're doing on the buses, which might mean some more money, but not a 238% increase. So my real what I really want to tell everybody out there to do tonight is I want to tell you, if you haven't requested your absentee ballot, that you better do that, because if you haven't, you're going to miss out on this election. And who knows what the result of certain things is going to be. And not only do you have to request it, but then it has to come to you. And then you have to fill out the ballot and send it back. And time, my friends, is running out. So any final words of wisdom you wanna kind of share on that, Barbara?
Definitely, Dan. I wanted to talk about the fact that, there's 820 something thousand people in this county. And it's an estimate that anywhere from I heard the sort of people say 15%. There's no way 15% of our population rides the bus. But for my calculation, I said that the 3% of the 820,000 people ride the bus. 25,000 people then is what that would be. If you take so also I reduced down the adjusting for inflation on how much this would raise. So I'm just saying that over the course of 25 years, that's the year 2045, we will still be paying for this tax. And let's just say that it will raise $4 billion. Okay, and I get it that people that come to work at Empower You need a ride to work. But when you think about the fact that if you take that, if you take that $4 billion and you divide it by 25,000 riders, it comes out to $160,000 over the course of the next 25 years per person using the bus right now. $160,000 over the next 25 years. So what I'm saying to you is we can do better. We can find ways to get these people to work, whether it's right-sized vans, whether it's the free market, the profit motive is always missing whenever you have government at the table with government, meaning government entities such as SORTA at the table with government entities such as the unions. There is nobody there talking for the taxpayers, and the fact that we could afford to pay, what is it, $6,400 a year per rider is what we could be providing for these people to get them to work.
And the one thing is, I was having a little trouble with the slides earlier. I don't know if the ridership screen is up there now. I hope it is, but I just want to share with everybody that really what's happened that is since Lyft and Uber came on the scene 5 years ago, ridership's just gone down. It's just continued to go down, and that's really, really what is so concerning. So I just want to thank you so much, Barbara, for joining us tonight, and thanks for sharing your thoughts with us. And we'll put a copy of your article in the newspaper up at empoweryouohio.org, and we appreciate it. Have a good night tonight. Thank you.
Thank you, Dan.
Excellent. So next, we're going to have our next guest talk about tonight's other kind of exciting topic that's been so much in the news, and that's Al Tuchfarber, who's professor of science at University of Cincinnati. He's the owner of the Tuchfarber Political Economics Report that comes out every Monday. And Al brings you insights and forecasts that you will not find elsewhere in his weekly Tuchfarber report. It's a summary and analysis of the important things occurring in the US and world politics. Al is an academic and entrepreneur who's had a successful career as a teacher, researcher, senior administrator, campaign manager, political analyst, organizational strategist, and writer. He holds a PhD in political science as well as over 100 publications. His areas of special interest to him are American politics, political economics, global politics, and global political economics, political polling, campaign, and organizational strategies. There's a lot we could have Al Tuchfarber talk to us about. His predictions are incredibly accurate, and we just encourage you, if you're interested, you can email Al at the address that's on the screen and ask him for a complimentary one-week subscription to his Tuchfarber report. And we are just so glad to have Al here with us tonight. Al, welcome to Empower You.
Thanks, Dan. It's great to be here.
Go for it.
I want to thank you and Betty and Jay for the great help that you provide, and I want to thank all the people that are listening in. It's great to talk to all of you. You know, the topic is how and why the U.S., China, and world will change because of the coronavirus pandemic. And this is one of the most important events of the last century. Certainly not as big as the Great Depression or World War II, but an enormously important event that's going to change our world in dramatic ways. My thoughts tonight, of course, are our initial thoughts. They're not definitive. We're in the earliest stages of dealing with this. And I'm only going to scratch the surface of many of these thoughts, but I want to give you some things to think about, some of the major changes that are underway, some of the consequences of what's happening, and you know, we'll go from there. The first question that I had presented in my promo for the night is, why is the U.S. recovery likely this summer? We're most likely to have what economists call a V-shaped recovery, and that means very steeply down and very steeply up. And the reason for that is fairly clear, and that is the economy was very strong before this crisis hit us. And in fact, it's only 30 days ago that the economy was very strong. And in the first 2 weeks in March, everything was going along just great. Unemployment was incredibly low, and things were terrific. And then all of a sudden, we had the beginnings of the appropriate government shutdowns, and that just pulled the plug out of the economy. And you know, as we've seen in the last 3 weeks, we've now got at least 20 million people out of work, and it's going to get worse. And I hate to say that. But the good news is that government at all levels is reacting very, very well. The Congress and the president, with you know the ugly politics that sometimes goes on, have created an incredible stimulus program, and they've only really created the first half of it. So far, the stimulus package is about $2.5 trillion. $2.5 trillion. That's 2,500 billion dollars, which is incredible. My prediction is the total stimulus package enacted by the president and the Congress is going to go to between $4 and $5 trillion. And I know that sounds ridiculous, and I'll come back to at the very end of this presentation and talk about the consequences of that. In some ways, even more important, the Federal Reserve has stepped up in an unbelievable way, a totally unprecedented way. And they have already injected about $3 trillion into the US economy in the form of credit. And that doesn't mean that it's, you know, just cash donations or throwing money from helicopters or anything like that, but credit that is essential to keep the economy going. They did the same thing in 2008, 2009. They're doing it much more efficiently this year. And so far they put in about $3 trillion. My prediction is it's going to go to as much as $8 trillion. And they have the ability to do that. And that's not going to seriously threaten the economy for reasons that I'll get into a little bit later. At the end of this, I'm going to try to leave plenty of time for Q&A. My favorite part of any talk that I give is the Q&A, because that gives the audience the chance to really get in the mix and talk about things they want to talk about rather than what I want to talk about. My next question that I did in the promo was, why are effective treatments more important than vaccines for economic recovery? Now that may seem odd to combine the health and the economy, but they are inextricably intertwined. We're not going to have a vaccine for anywhere from a few months to as long as 18 months. The vaccine is not going to solve the economic problems. It just isn't. There's no way in hell. Fear is going to control the economy. Think about that. Fear, your personal fear about contracting the virus yourself, or, and for many of you, especially if you're younger, contracting the virus and then giving it to your parents or your grandparents and then having them get sick and die from it. That is the fear that's really driving things. And that's not getting nearly enough attention from the politicians or even from the health folks. Although I give the health folks and the politicians terrific credit for doing a brilliant job so far. Not perfect. Nobody ever does a perfect job, but they've been brilliant so far. So fear is the key, and the treatments, confidence that we have as individuals, that the treatments will save us or our parents or our grandparents, are immediate concerns. And they're going to drive how fast we're willing to get back to something approaching normal, much more so than a vaccine that's not going to be available for a long time. My next question that I promised to answer is, will China get the blame? Yes. You read articles every day. You see this stupid media, the incredibly stupid media in the US and around the world saying, oh, China's going to get away with this. They're going to be okay. They're even going to get credit for this. That's absolute nonsense. That's BS to use some initials. Within a few weeks or months, everybody on the planet is going to fully understand the Chinese started this virus. It's more and more evidence is piling up just in the last 48 hours that it was an accident that started in a biology lab in Wuhan, which is the city in China where this all began. From the very beginning, China lied about the virus. And because they lied, millions are going to die around the world. Not millions in the United States, but millions around the world. Most of the people that die are not going to be in the United States or in Europe or Japan or developed countries. They're going to be in poor countries that don't have the facilities to save the people that can be saved. They don't have ventilators. They don't have ICUs. They don't have the things that you have to save people that get pneumonia and get really, really sick. China lied, people died. That's the bottom line. The world's going to know all the details. The media in China, in Europe, the US is going to try to protect the Chinese because they think that this is a way to get at Trump. But the truth always comes out. It's just a matter of time as to how fast it comes out. In this case, it's going to come out within weeks or at most months. And another thing to think about is the truth about the coup by the deep state, by the Obama administration against Trump. That's all in the process of coming out. That will come out over the summer and the early fall. So the truth will come out. Know that the Chinese Communist Party lies about everything. You can't trust anything they say, except maybe that the sun comes up in the morning. So don't trust anything that they say. Another key issue, we've had a massive change in the world over the last 30 to 50 years, and that's globalization. That means the dispersal of jobs around the world to low-cost labor countries. And the biggest advocate for that and beneficiary of that was, of course, China. And they have become the manufacturing center for the entire planet. That was a travesty. Should never have happened, but it did. It's the reality. But the good news is that globalization is going to be greatly slowed. It's not going to stop, but it's going to be greatly slowed by this pandemic. And there's going to be a dramatic move of jobs away from China. But most of them are not going to come back to the United States or Europe. They're going to go to South Asia, to India and Bangladesh, Indonesia, Southeast Asia, Malaysia. They're also going to go to Mexico, interestingly enough, who is our NAFTA partner, and it's going to become even more important to us in the future, although Mexico is going to have a horrible recession because of this pandemic and because of the horrible leadership of their socialist president right now. Some of the jobs will return to the United States. Mostly they will be defense-related jobs, and they will be jobs related to health supplies. And that's going to come mainly not because the economics are good in a free market sense. It's going to come because the US government is going to subsidize that to a large degree. And that's a very good thing. We can't afford to have key strategic items, either manufactured or commodities like rare earth metals, being controlled by our enemy. And China is our enemy. Don't have any doubt about that. We pretend that they're frenemies, or halfway between friends and enemies. They are our enemy. And they are, we are at war with them, and they are at war with us even more viciously than we are with them. President Trump realizes that. He pretends that he's friends with President Xi of China. That's horseshit. There's no real friendship there. We're at a war with each other, but we're the #1 and #2 nations in the world, and we have to deal with each other. There's no way around that. So the other thing that I want to mention about globalization is a related word that is oftentimes used interchangeably with globalization, but it's a very different concept. That's called globalism. Globalism is actually a political ideology, and it says it's great for jobs and people and money and ideas to move totally freely around the world. This pandemic and previous things have proven that globalism is totally bankrupt. And the good news is globalism is having a stake driven through its heart by this pandemic. And that's wonderful news for the world, and especially for the United States. Another question that I posed in my promo for this: why is China's economy never going to fully recover? China has bought growth for the last 12 years, since the 2008-2009 Great Recession. China had been growing at 10% a year, and in the last 5 years or so, they had been growing at 6% a year. It's all based on debt. And I'm not going to go deeply into the numbers tonight. Maybe I can do that in a future presentation. But China has been spending $4 trillion a year to buy less than $1 trillion a year in growth. Now, if you're a business person, you understand how stupid that is. They've been doing it for 12 years. They have built a tremendous debt bubble, which was going to burst anyway. This pandemic is guaranteed to burst that debt bubble. So they're going to have what economists call an L-shaped recovery. And think in terms of the letter L. So it's straight down, and then it's flat going out. And think about that flat growth going out into the future. The reality is what's really going to happen is they're going to go straight down, and they already are in the process of going straight down. And then they're going to go into negative territory. They're going to have a bad recession, at least what for them is a bad recession. And I don't know what's minus 1% or minus 5% or what it is. But compare that to growing 5 to 10% a year, which is what they've been doing for the last 40 years. They are going to then flatten out, probably with a growth of around 1% for the indefinite future. They are going to stop catching up to the United States, which they've been doing for the last 40 years. And they're going to go backwards rather than forwards. And I'll give you an example of how this happens in history. In 1990, Japan's GDP compared to the US was 52%. They were catching up to us. They were supposedly going to catch us about now and become the biggest economy in the world. The reality is Japan's GDP is now 23% of US GDP, and it's falling. Every year, it's falling. China will never catch up. Japan never caught up. There's no country on the planet that can catch the United States anytime this century. Now, I can't look beyond this century. I won't even try to be stupid and say anything about that. But the reality is nobody's going to catch us. And in fact, we're going to become more dominant this century than any country has ever been in the history of the planet. Related to that, another question that I posed in the promo is why the US is going to become more and more dominant of the international economy and even more so of international finances. Very few people, only a couple 100,000 people on the whole planet realize that in the 2008-2009 Great Recession, it was the United States Federal Reserve, the central bank of the United States, that saved the world's economy. If they hadn't intervened and spread dollars all over the world's economy would have collapsed. It would have been far worse than it already was, and as you know, it was horrible. They're doing the same thing now, and they're doing even more. It's incredible what they're doing. The dollar is becoming the world's currency. You may say that's bad news. You don't like that idea. Well, let me give you a little factoid. It costs 15.4 cents to produce a $100 US bill. Every one of those that gets created and circulated around the world, and there are 12 billion $100 bills circulating around the world. Every one of those $100 bills is worth $100 to the US Treasury. So the world is subsidizing us. We're not subsidizing them. The world's subsidizing us. Next question I posed is, how will the United States job market, workforce, and also our companies change? And I can only barely scratch the surface here. Obviously, there's going to be a lot more work at home. That's going on now. And some of those people will never go back full-time to their office. Most will. I have no doubt about that. Most will. But the software that's been developed is incredible. We're using that software as we speak here tonight with the tremendous interactive capabilities of it. You see how powerful it is, how good it is technically. And Jay, thank you so much for all you do. So we're going to see more and more work at home. We're going to see much less international travel to meetings. And in fact, we're going to see much less US travel to meetings with more and more technology use. And that's going to save a tremendous amount of money for companies. And that'll be another good benefit. We're going to see fewer and fewer face-to-face meetings in organizations. Again, because the technology is getting so good and so efficient that we don't have to get together. Now, the loss of the personal interaction, the face-to-face interaction, is going to be a loss. There's no question about that. And I don't like meetings, and I used to have a rule that when I ran meetings, and I ran hundreds of them over my career, that they could last about 45 minutes. But you needed to draw people out face to face at times. But those meetings are going to be far fewer in the future. The other important things that are going to happen is there's going to be far less just-in-time warehousing and availability of spare parts. This pandemic and other problems we've had in recent years, it proves to businesses that it's unsafe to have so few reserves of spare parts available. We're going to have an incredible warehousing boom. If you want to look for a place to invest in warehouses, because there's going to be a massive increase of demand for warehousing, both because of the Amazons and all the other internet suppliers, but also because Procter & Gamble and Kroger and all of the major corporations in the world are going to say, oh my God, I can no longer rely on China getting me parts or commodities or whatever within weeks or months. I have to have those supplies on hand to keep going. Also related to that is there going to be a lot less outsourcing to China and to a lot of other places. We're learning a horrible, difficult lesson here, but we learn. We human beings learn. We really do. And that's one of the great things about us. We're the only species that learns. People talk about, other species being equal to us in importance, the PETA folks, and that's a joke. We learn, we're going to learn a lot. Another question that I posed in my outline is, why is the president and why are the governors going to get more power? The simple fact is, just observe day to day. Look who we're looking to now. What press conferences do we look at? We looked at Donald Trump. We looked at Andrew Cuomo. We looked at Mike DeWine, who's done an incredible job in Ohio. When the shit hits the fan, you look to your leaders. You can't wait for the legislature to act. You never know if they're ever going to get around to it. You know that they're going to play politics instead of leading. So the governors, the president, are going to get more power. They already have taken more power. The Constitution allows that in an emergency. But legislatively, in the future, Trump, future presidents, future governors, current governors are going to get more power. And that's a good thing. And, I know that's a little scary, but just think about what we've gone through and the need for leadership in this crisis. And there will be future crises where we're going to need that as well.
Al, can I ask a couple questions?
Sure.
Okay, so what would you anticipate when kind of things start to get back to life? And I want to ask anybody who's got a question about China or really anything else talked about, just put your mouse down at the bottom of the screen and you can ask a question under Q&A. But what will the first kind of signs for Trump be with respect to the tariffs and the trade policy that we've been kind of implementing with China? What do you expect to see?
I don't know for sure. I think that most of the tariffs, it's not just China that's had it in tariffs imposed. I think many of them will gradually go away for the good of the U.S. and the good of the world. But I think China's going to be punished. I want to go back. I'm not being hyperbolic here. We are in a war. It's not a military shooting war, but we're in a broad-scale, broad-based war with China. China needs to be punished. Now, there's a lot of nonsense out there coming from some senators about things we should do. But China needs to be punished, and they will be punished, and they're going to suffer dramatic economic consequences because of what they've done.
Now, Do you believe that the other countries that have had the same issues we've had with the pandemic, will they also punish China, or will the kind of favorite ones of them not punish them? What do you expect to see worldwide?
Dan, let me go through the rest of the questions I posed in advance, because
Okay.
actually the answers to those questions speak to your question.
Okay, excellent.
So my next question that I posed in my promo for this evening is, why will the US and the world be better prepared next time? There's a very simple reason. We humans learn. We're not stupid. We learn. We can never let this happen again. We can never let a pandemic shut down the entire world's economy. This is a catastrophe that we're living through. Now, if things go as I think they will in the US, we're going to have a quick recovery, but we're still going to destroy somewhere between $2 and $4 trillion of GDP growth this year that we would normally have had. That's horrible. We've got at least 20 million, probably going to be over 30 million Americans out of work that want to work. We can't let that happen again. But the good news is the fear that this is creating in all of us, individually and collectively, is going to make us act and be smarter next time. We've never experienced anything like this before in the world. Actually, for 102 years, the Spanish flu in 1917 and 1918 is the only equivalent. And back then, when the world's population was only 25% of what it is now, it's estimated that 50 to 100 million citizens of the globe died from that flu. We don't have high death rates from the flu anymore because we've got antibiotics, we've got ventilators, we've got ICUs. We can save the people that die from the flu. Although even in the case of the flu every year in this country, we have 25 to 75 million deaths a year, not million, 25 to 75,000 deaths a year from the flu. But most of those people are already very sick, and the flu just kind of pushes them over the edge. So it's fear that's going to drive us to be much, much better protected next time. And the government will act, and the states will act. Have confidence on that. They will not do it perfectly. Do not expect them to do it perfectly, but they will do it. My next question relates to America first. The media in the United States, the Democrats and the world press, pilloried Donald Trump for saying America first. Let's first of all talk about what America first really means. It means our country first, and more importantly, in terms of understanding it in this country, it means putting our working class folks and our middle class folks first, not the elites and not the poor, because it's the working class folks and it's middle class folks that make this country work. And they pay the taxes and they do the jobs, and that's who you have to protect first. The world hated that. The media hated that. The elites hated it. The Democrats hated it. Now, every country that's in the midst of this pandemic, and gradually it's going to be all 200 or so countries on the planet that are going to be crushed by this pandemic, are saying, oh my God, it's my country first. It's Italy first. It's Spain first. It's Indonesia first. It's Russia first. Certainly it's China first, and China is the worst of all the countries in the world in terms of creating this monster. The simple truth is that all the international organizations and all the regional organizations, United Nations, the European Union, the Eurozone, the World Health Organization, they've all failed. They've all failed totally. The nation state is now what counts. Think about it. The United States is looking out for the United States. We're actually looking out for far more other countries and other people than any other country is. China's getting a few kudos, But that's all going to collapse within a couple of weeks because it was all lies. It's the United States that saved the world's economy. It's the United States that saved the world's financial system. We will give more than anybody gives. Those ventilators that Ford's making and GM and others, we're not going to need them. They're going to go to other countries. We're going to give them away with the government paying for it, which is what we should do. The world's international works and regional works have failed. The nation state, including America, is what counts. What about the November election? How's this all going to affect the November election? Nobody knows for sure, but I've got some early ideas, and in my weekly Tuchfarber report, I update this every week, and it's a major topic, obviously, every week. It's too soon to say for sure what's going to happen in the fall. Clearly, the biggest threat to Trump's reelection is that the recession stays much longer than the end of the summer. I think that we're going to have a recovery during the summer, and I think in the fall and in the late, as we go into the election period in November, late October, that the economy is actually going to be coming back very, very strongly. Not back to where it was, but clearly coming back with employment picking up very dramatically, unemployment going down dramatically. I went back and I looked at all the presidential elections since World War II. We've had a recession during the election year 3 times. In 1948, Harry Truman was the Democrat running against Thomas Dewey, the Republican. There was a bad recession that started that fall during the election period. Truman still won 49-45 over Dewey, and it was an astounding win. In 1960, VP Richard Nixon was the Republican nominee, and John Kennedy was the Democratic nominee. That election essentially was a tie. It was only 1/10 of 1% difference between Nixon and Kennedy. And Kennedy, of course, won because he won the electoral vote. He also won the popular vote by 0.1%. But that was a tie. The only time that the incumbent president had a bad loss during an election year was Jimmy Carter in 1980. Jimmy Carter was a disaster. He was inept. He had the Iran crisis. He was up against a brilliant politician and leader, Ronald Reagan, who proved that during his 8 years. And so there's no evidence from history that says that an incumbent president can't win re-election during a recession. The other thing to keep in mind is Joe Biden is an unmitigated disaster as a candidate. I've been saying and watching Joe Biden for 40 years and saying that he's a horrible politician. His political instincts are just horrible. He is in early senility. Watch him carefully. Watch him very carefully. If you're a health person and you're trained in this area, watch him carefully. Watch his gaffes. Watch his confusion. He's in early senility. He's got no charisma, and he's got no leadership skills. Now, does that mean that he'll automatically lose to Trump? No, it doesn't mean that. But it means that Trump still is the odds-on favorite.
Can we take a few? Got a bunch of questions coming up. Al, can we take a few?
Sure.
Tom wanted to know, has any quantification of the rough order of the magnitude of economic disruption caused by an outflow of jobs from China? How many jobs has China lost?
China's lost so far, you mean?
Yeah.
It's just beginning. I mean, we're just turning the corner. They're going to go off a cliff. So they've been going along. As I said earlier, they've been buying growth with 4 trillion a year in debt. They're now going to go off a cliff. That debt bubble is going to collapse now and be exacerbated by a worldwide recession, which is going to be worse in China.
Jay would like to ask the question, do you think we will be able to gear up again for way more domestic manufacture of medications, including antibiotics, in a reasonable time frame?
We are already started. That's already underway on a massive scale. That's not hard to do. That's relatively easy. And with the government subsidies that will be there within, I don't know, 6 to 12 months, we will be more than halfway where we need to be. Within a couple of years, we'll be close to 100% of where we need to be.
There wouldn't be any risk then, you think, of running out of medicines in the short term?
There already is, and there's already shortfalls. And that's another thing that's going to make China look horrible.
Randy wanted to ask the question, do you think there are active forces in the country working to keep things unstable for political purposes, i.e. the presidency?
There are active forces. There was a coup against Trump during the campaign and during his presidency. That's all beginning to come out in detail now. And I don't want to spend a lot of time on that. I'd be glad to come back and talk about that at some time, but it's 100% of that's going to come out before the election, which is another thing that's going to pull Biden down.
Tony wanted to ask you a question. What effect will our COVID experience have on Agenda 2030?
Which part of Agenda 2030?
I don't know. That's a question I don't know.
That question's too big to tackle.
We'll go there. Tom wanted to know, if Trump is not reelected in the fall, what does the U.S. economy look like going forward?
Growth slows. Remember, we're very likely to have third and fourth quarter growth that's very fast. If Trump is not reelected, the stock market will collapse and we will go back into a recession.
Somebody mentioned, they said that your analysis of the elections may not have included the 1932 election.
That's correct. And you know, that was a 32, the country had been in a depression actually for 3.5 years. Hoover was a horrible candidate. FDR was a charismatic, brilliant candidate, although he made all sorts of domestic policy mistakes until the war. But that's absolutely true. But the modern world, the modern communication only dates from World War II. Actually, it dates from the TV era that started in the late 40s, early 50s. And that's why I started there.
Dan asked the question, would a financially weak China go to war?
No, they can't afford to. They're not strong enough yet. There's been a lot of analogies and analysis said that China's like Japan was in the 30s. China's not strong enough yet. And more importantly, conventional warfare is now too damaging. All it takes is 1,000 Tomahawk missiles from our fleet or from Taiwan, which has their own 1,000 Tomahawk missiles, to take out every power plant in the eastern periphery, the eastern coast of China. Major conventional war is no longer possible the way that nuclear war is not possible because of mutually assured destruction.
Joe asked the question, or it says a statement, we maintain trillions in debt currently. The Fed is taking on more trillions on their books, and we have trillions of deficit spending this year alone. What does debt service and the payback of principal, when does it become a problem, a burden to a V-shaped recovery?
It's actually going to become far less of a burden. And that's actually the last point I wanted to talk about tonight. And I've got 2 others I'd like to slip in if I can. But let me talk about that because that's a brilliant question. Here's the irony. before the pandemic and everything, the US budget for this year was projected that we'd end the year in the end of September with about $24 trillion in federal debt. We were budgeting and we were on target to pay $500 billion, a half a trillion in interest on that debt, okay? So it's about the average interest that we were paying on our treasury notes and bills and bonds and everything was 2%. That was the average, all the way from, very small to maybe, 2.5% on some things. The reality is that interest rates are going to be driven way down, not just for the government, but for everybody because of this pandemic and because of this recession. The average cost of federal interest is going to go down to 1%. So my best estimate is that federal debt's going to go up to 28 trillion, that next year we will be spending 300 billion servicing that debt. That's down from 500 billion this year. Now, more debt's not good news. I'm not defending debt at all, but we have to save the economy. And if you think about servicing a debt, think about being a business. It's the debt service that is the most important thing to you in your annual financial planning. And that's the interest is actually going to go down. Also, let me bring this to the personal level. The mortgage rates for either purchases or refinancing are going, for the conceivable future, for years, are going to be 3 to 4% instead of 5 to 6%. That means you can buy more house or you can refinance and get a tremendous decrease in your monthly payment. So this pandemic, this economic crisis is horrible, but there are some silver linings.
Now, let me just ask you get you a couple more questions, and then I'm going to let you get your last 2 points in. With all the money being created by the Fed, what about inflation?
We learned something that theory said was impossible, and that our previous experience said was impossible from the 2008-2009 Great Recession. And that is, even though we had 3 major quantitative easings by the US Federal Reserve, and they created, with clicks of a mouse, $4 trillion on their books, no inflation was created. When the world's economy is going to be in a slow growth mode for years, the US is going to recover faster than almost anybody else. We'll be growing again in the last half of the year. Europe is going to be a disaster. They're probably going to be totally stagnating for years, if not longer. China's going to be in a recession and it's going to stay down. The emerging markets around the world are going to be unmitigated basket cases financially. This is going to be a very bad decade for the world, but the US is going to be, as the old saying goes, the cleanest dirty shirt.
Well, I've got to tell you one thing, that listening to you tonight has made me about the most optimistic that I've felt in an awful long time. So I appreciate that. One quick last question. US has, of course, said they're going to stop funding the WHO. Do you expect other countries to bail on the WHO or just the US?
I think other countries will temporarily. Remember that what Trump actually did was put a moratorium on payments for 60 to 90 days. And that is a classic Trump political tactic to get the current leader and leadership to resign and restructure that organization, which has totally failed the world in their role. They were misled by China. They knew they were being misled. And the WHO lied to the world. And because of that, and because of China, millions will die. That leadership must be replaced.
I'm going to let you make your couple final points. We're getting tight on time. I'll let you do that and finish up, and we'll end the session. Keep going.
Okay, just one last point I really want to make, and that is about energy. We will, before this pandemic hit, before this economic crisis hit, the world already had a glut of energy, and a glut of oil, a glut of natural gas, a glut of coal, and an emerging glut of renewable energy. This pandemic is destroying about anywhere from, depending on the estimate, 10 to 30% of demand for energy. Energy costs are going to plummet. We can now count the American consumer of gasoline can count on $2 a gallon, except in states like California that have really high taxes. So here in Ohio, we're going to pay about $2 a gallon for gas for years rather than $3 a gallon. Our heating and cooling costs are going to go way down. Basically, that's going to bring inflation down to zero, if not negative temporarily. That's going to help keep interest rates down, which is one of the reasons I'm so confident that interest rates are going to stay so low. So there are silver linings to this horrible crisis.
Thank you very much, Al, for joining us tonight to talk about China. There's so much more we could talk to you about. And thank you, geez, personally, just hearing something be a little positive is just such a incredibly great thing. Thank you, Al Tuchfarber, for joining Empower You. And as we kind of conclude tonight's session, just a couple things I wanted to go back to the first part of our session when we talked about issue 7. And that would be, there were a couple questions we didn't get to that weren't answered. Somebody asked the question, how much does Uber or Lyft charge? They charge $1 to $2 a mile. And there was another question about, so does that mean we could buy a car, one new car for every rider every 4 years? It works out just about that. It would be about $5,400 a year for the 24,000 riders of the system. And then the last thing I felt like I wanted to mention earlier, but I didn't get to it, was to let you know the Dusty Roads supports issue 7. That doesn't, Dusty's is a friend of Empower You, and that doesn't match up with his article that I'm asking you to read on empoweruohio.org about you shouldn't have elections about important things in March. So I don't know how that squares up, but I did feel like I wanted to pass that on. As we close tonight's session, I wanted to share with you information just about another empowered citizen. I want to thank Al Tuchfarber. I want to thank Barbara Holwadel for joining us tonight. But I did want to talk about this very important woman, Katherine Johnson, who was born in West Virginia in 1918. She's an empowered citizen. As a young girl, she was fascinated by numbers, and it was clear early on that she was gifted. She graduated from high school at 14 and finished college with a degree in math and French, and attended a historically Black college. She initially became a teacher, but in 1953, she took a job at NASA. She said, I just happened to be working with the guys, and when they had briefings, I asked permission to go, and the guy said, well, girls usually don't go. And I said, well, is there a law? They said no. So then my boss said, let her go. She never stopped going, using her extraordinary computing skills to move up NASA's chain of command. Before John Glenn flew Friendship 7 in 1962 to become the first American to orbit Earth, he asked Johnson, will you please double check the math of this new electronic computation device? When Glenn got ready to go, he said to Johnson, call her. And if she says the computer's right, I'll take it. Katherine Johnson did calculations for the first moon landing, and later she worked at the space shuttle program, and she was awarded the nation's highest civilian honor, the Presidential Medal of Freedom, in 2015. And she was featured in the movie Hidden Features. Katherine Johnson died February 24th at the age of 101. She was truly an empowered woman, I would say. And what I'd like to say tonight is thank you for joining Empower You. And Katherine,